All right, welcome back to another video in this character modeling series where today we're going to be getting a good head start here on working on our clothing. Now, in the last video, I did some pattern drafting and started getting to the point where I was able to use ZBrush to block out some of the clothing and export that into files that I can then bring into Photoshop. Now, there's a couple of things here that I would like to do with these in order to make them a little bit more usable. So if I go into my patterns here and I'm going to open up Photoshop and we're just going to drag these things in. So I have my pants, I have my jacket, and I have my bodysuit here. And if I go and take a look at these are the UVs that were provided to me via ZBrush. And if you remember, I was taking a look at trying to organize them a little bit better. Now, I was doing this in the Morph UV section of ZBrush, which is why they didn't take. I actually have to go and convert the geometry to the shape of the UVs to do this. Now, I'm pleased with the shape of these things, but I am not, however, sold on the rotation. So there's a few areas here where this is going to need to be better. And what that's going to be is it's going to be actually lining these things up in the way that you would actually set them if you were going to be cutting them out of fabric. And so if you kind of pictured maybe doing a pair of plaid pants, as it were, you know, I wouldn't want my plaid to go diagonally across these legs and this one almost even sideways. That's not going to make sense. Or if you think of the way that the fabric on a pair of jeans travels, right? If you look at the lines that you get from the weave, they all typically go straight down your leg. And that's something that I'm going to need to reproduce here. In order to do that, I'm going to need to line these things up so that they follow the direction of the fibers from the fabric from which they're going to be made. This one is probably the best in terms of its organization, in terms of its rotation here of the pieces. Again, with only really just the arm pieces being a little skewed. You can see that because of the way that this was Z-remeshed, in that we get these these kind of rounded corners on things. Again, this is something that I'm going to need to adjust inside of Marvelous Designer. We're also looking at white on gray, and I'm going to go into my levels here and adjust that. Essentially, I just need to bring the input level of my black up above this little spike in the graph here, which is going to ensure that I'm now black and white instead of this gray color. Now, I could have just changed this in ZBrush when I exported it. However, it's also not a really hard fix to do here. So here's my jacket, my pants, and then finally the bodysuit. Now, with this character, I can actually go and put these all into a single image to bring into Marvelous Designer. But a lot of the times when I work, I'm not just thinking of this character, I'm thinking of future characters. And one of the things that's really nice about having a base mesh created the way that we have here, where we've got something that's relatively close to a human being in terms of the proportions and in terms of the anatomy, that I can reuse this for other female characters. And the same holds true for a male base mesh or anything in between for that matter. Once you're happy with the anatomical sculpt that you have, you can kind of use this as the basis to speed yourself up with future characters. And that is something that actually happens at a lot of studios, where they will have this collection of blanks, as they were, of human anatomy, human forms, that they can go and use as the starting point for all of their characters. It really does speed up a lot of the process. And so typically I will remake one of my anatomical sculpts every couple of years or so, just to again push further my knowledge of anatomy and to make sure that I am not losing any of that skill set. But it does mean that this is reusable. The same holds true for the clothing. The more characters you make, and especially if you're doing contemporary clothing or you're doing something that is an everyday type of outfit, this is also something that you can reuse. And so these patterns, while they are kind of very, in terms of their look and their design, they are very much in favor of being the shape of that Star Trek uniform that I'm looking to create. There are some pretty generic things to this too. The pants are a fairly generic shape, and the bodysuit is a very generic shape. And these things are actually tailored to my base mesh. So that means if I were going to be starting another character using the same anatomical figure, provided I don't make any large anatomical changes to her, I would be able to reuse these images here again. So for that reason, I'm not going to merge these together. I'm going to leave them as separate entities here. Now, the idea is that I would like to position them in a little bit of a better way. So I don't like where the sleeves are here. And I would actually like to go and reposition them. So to do that, I'm just going to select the sleeve and go in and move it up here. And I'm just moving my selection. I'm not actually even altering this thing. I'm going to go into selection and I'm going to go to transform selection. And this is going to allow me to rotate this thing until it lines up a little bit better with what I would kind of expect the pattern of a sleeve to look like. Again, I'm kind of thinking of the direction of the fibers here that you would get in the creation of this object. So this would probably be a perfectly straight line across the bottom, and I'm looking at that top of the sleeve. So I'm pretty pleased with that. I'm going to go and create a new layer where I'm going to fill it with white. Okay, and then I'm going to bring my selection down below this. I'm going to go to select again. I'm going to go to modify and let's go to transform rather, and right click, and I'm going to flip horizontally and hit enter, and I will paste that one as well. So this has now copied these shapes to now a more linear or properly positioned area here. And again, I can kind of move them over. That again, they're on a separate layer here, so I don't have to worry about them impeding or blocking any of this other pattern. And I just kind of want to get them as close as I can. Back over here, I'm going to go and select the two original sleeves, and I'm going to fill them with black. I now can merge the original or the new sleeves into the original image. And I'm also going to crop this just so that I'm not wasting any file size here and having anything I don't need in relation to this. Now, there is one more thing I need to do with this, which is to determine scale. And we're going to kind of revisit that in a moment. I'm going to do the same thing here with each of these other patterns. So again, here's the jacket and there's the pants. Again, I'm going to unlock this layer. Again, I'm pretty happy with the back of the jacket. It is already laid out in such a manner as to be perfectly straight. And so I kind of like that. I'm going to go and select in this thing. Let's go to the magic wand here again. And I'm going to select the front of the jacket. I'm going to go to select, transform selection. And I'm going to, again, rotate this. This is often easier to see if we look at it on a black portion where there is no image. And I'm really just looking for this kind of neckline here, the front zipper line to be straight. Something a little bit like that, I think, is going to work. Now I'm going to bring this over to the left here, and I'm on a new layer so we can fill. I can hit enter and fill, and then I'm also going to go select, transform selection, right click, and also flip horizontally. And I'm going to go move this one just beside it here. Now again, I'm going to, when I create my patterns inside of the software, use symmetry to generate these things next to one another in the right way. But you can see I'm kind of lining this up in a little bit of a better way here. So we've got the back, the front right, the front left. Let's go and do one of the sleeves here too. So again, I'm going to select the sleeve. And then just to make it a little bit easier on what I'm looking at here, I'm going to make a new layer. Let's actually deselect that sleeve for the time being. And what I want to do, let's go back into this layer, is select that sleeve. And I'm going to go to select, transform selection again. And this black layer is just making it a little bit easier for me to see that sleeve without having the rest of the pattern here, because I am going to want to put it right here. So I'm going to go to my new layer and I'll fill that. I'm going to go to select, transform, right click, horizontal, enter. We'll go and move this over. Let's move it horizontally. And I'm just going to get it as close as I can here. We'll fill that as well and see how close I got it. Let's undo that. Bring this in. Or something like that. Again, I want to get them kind of close together here if I can. And then lastly, the final piece that's missing is the collar, which lives right here. Now, again, this is probably not exactly what I'm looking for in terms of the shape of the collar. I'm going to go and place this just above the sleeves here and fill that with white. Okay, now that we have that done, let's go and get rid of this black layer. I'm going to go into the original costume or the original pattern here. We'll hide our new ones. And I know I don't need any of these 4, 5 pieces here. So I'm going to fill those with black, remove them, bring the new pieces up. And again, I'll go to crop and we'll set this up. Again, what's missing here is some form of being able to denote the scale of this pattern. So actually how big this pattern is supposed to be. And there is something we need to do here before we go and do that. So that's 2 of the 3 done. I'm just going to go and minimize this a little bit, drag it over to this side, and I can continue doing the same thing with the pants. So again, we're going to go and add a new layer. In this case, everything needs to be skewed one way or the other. Now, if I look at this, I can see that this leg and this leg are almost exactly at the same angle. And so because of that, that's going to mean that manipulating those guys is going to be a little bit easier. Now, what I would like to do, if I go and manipulate this now, if I go and transform it and rotate it so that those things are straight, like so. When I do that, it may go and screw up some of my pixels here. It looks like it's actually doing it quite nicely. So I have my transform set up correctly. That means that this thing is now, these 2 pant legs here are now good to go. I am going to go and move this one. I'm going to go and create, there's my new layer. I'm going to go and drag this one over to the side here. And I may even right click and transform my selection as well. Nope, can't do it in there. Let's go to select, transform selection. I'm just going to straighten this out just a little bit further. Again, I want the fibers to travel as straight down that leg as I can get them. So something like that, which I'm going to fill. I'm going to go to select, transform selection, right click and flip horizontally. And then we'll move this over and fill it there. And then we're going to go into this leg, select, transform selection, flip horizontally, and move it out here. And I will fill it on this layer too. So that should be all of these things, with the exception of the fact that, again, I've got my crooked parts here, which we don't want. So I'm going to go and fill those in. I'm just going to go and paint out these couple of little extra spots. And then we're going to merge this down and again use the crop tool to get rid of any wasted space here that isn't really necessary in the creation of these things. Now, I'm leaving a little bit of dead space around here. And again, that's going to be rather important because I need to set up my scale. So let's go and do that now. Now, when you create, as we have, our characters out of a Z-sphere inside of ZBrush, inevitably what happens is that the length of time that you clicked and dragged to create that first Z-sphere. So when you clicked originally and you dragged out that initial Z-sphere, or drug out that, I don't know what the past tense of drag is. But if you were to create that Z-sphere, however long it took you to drag out that Z-sphere is the scale that you've imparted into that geometry. And so that is going to mess up with the scale of our objects. The other thing is that since we started with the pelvis of our characters, the position of that character in the world is incorrect. The pelvis is going to be at the origin in 3D software. Now, the reason we need to get this to be the right size is that Marvelous Designer is a physics simulation software, and physics depends very greatly on scale being correct. So if your model is the wrong size, things are not going to appear the way that they actually should. And so that's going to be really important. You know, if you're looking to get something like a very light silk fabric and your character is the wrong scale, it can end up looking like very thick leather. And so making sure that we are doing things in the correct scale here is going to be important. So here is my base mesh, and I'm going to be using this as my avatar inside of Marvelous Designer, upon which we will be building the clothing. Now, there's a couple of things that I need to be wary of. First, Marvelous Designer is a fairly resource-intensive software, and I don't want to bring in 1,000,000.1 vertices into that software. And so I'm going to go to my subtool here, and I'm going to reduce her down until she's somewhere below 30,000. If you haven't got a version of your mesh that is below 30,000, I would recommend you ZBrush a copy of it to get it down to that size, because we need something that is going to be able to perform in the software. Now, I've also gone so far as to do things like cutting off hands, feet, and heads if they are not interacting with the clothing. I shouldn't need to at this scale. I think at 18,000 I should be okay, but keep that in mind. Now, the other thing that we need to worry about here is that in exporting this character and bringing her into Marvelous Designer, I'm going to need to actually break my scale inside of ZBrush. Now, the reason that this is important is that ZBrush is kind of this arbitrary scale, and it's not really accurate to anything real world, and we do need this to be more real world scale. So I want to be able to measure my character in centimeters and see how tall she is. So the way that I'm going to do this here is I'm going to first go and export this. I'm going to go to my export settings, and I'm going to make sure that groups is turned off. I do not want to export in groups. And then I'm going to go and export her. So I'm going to go and put this inside of my project folder here. I'm going to create, there's an OBJ folder here, and I'm going to go and name this avatar. Now, this is going to, if you look at the export settings, it is going to imbue some kind of scale on import export. I don't want to manipulate that because those numbers are really kind of skewed, that 82 with 9 decimal points. And what I want to do is I want to go into a package like Maya or 3ds Max, and I want to go and set the scale of my character correctly here, as well as make sure she's standing on the ground. So first, before I import anything into 3ds Max, it is important, very important, to make sure that Max is set up correctly, or Maya if that's where you're working. And to do that, I'm going to go to Customize Unit Setup. Now, inside my unit setup, I don't care what's being displayed. The display unit scale only just puts a little value at the end of anything in your UI. It doesn't actually change the scale of geometry. So if you choose metric, it's going to put, in this case, it's meters. It would put an M after every number. It doesn't actually change the scale of anything. To change the scale, this is just what's being displayed. To change the scale, we're going to go into the system units. And here we have 1 unit equals 1 centimeter. So my software is set up correctly. I don't need to change anything. Now I'm going to go import my character, and we can go see how big she actually is. So I'm going to import her as is. I'm going to make sure that I'm not changing the scale of anything, and we shall import. And here she is here, and you can see that there actually is a drastic problem that she is standing above the ground plane or embedded within the ground plane. And that she's huge too. Now, it might be hard to tell the scale. I'm a little used to this because I've been making characters for quite some time. I can tell by just the shape of the grid and perspective here that she's no good. And so let's go and do something that's going to allow us to figure out exactly how big this character should be. So I'm just going to draw a box here on the ground. This is because I'm in perspective, going to snap to the ground plane. And in the properties for this box, I'm going to go and impart a few settings that are going to make this thing about the size of a human being. So again, I'm doing this in metric here. So I'm going to do, let's say, let's do 40 centimeters by 64 centimeters. And then her height, and this is where I need to get this right. So depending on how tall you want this character to be, you should go and work out how tall you want them to be. And I think my plan for her was 5'6". I didn't want her to be very tall, and I did want her to be kind of average. And so what I'm going to do is go look this up in Google. I'm looking at 5'5", which is 5.5, which is 5'6". In centimeters is 167.64. So I don't have to be that to the decimal accurate, I'm going to put in 167. This box is now the height in scale of what my character should be. Now that I have some frame of reference for how big she should be, I'm going to select her. I'm going to go to my front view here. Let's convert it to an editable poly so we don't screw anything up going back and forth. I'm going to move her up, and I'm moving her via her element here. And the reason for this is that I'm going to make sure, I'm going to go put her foot on the ground here. The reason I'm moving her up is that it's not affecting her pivot point. That's still at the origin, like so. Okay, so she's standing at the ground. I would also want to check in my left and right view here that she is also centered front and back. Now, right now, again, because of where her geometry was, the furthest point to the right is the back of her rear end, and the furthest point to the front is the tips of her fingers, which actually have nothing to do with her body. What I want to do is I want to kind of center the front of the ear with that center line. This too is going to make sure that her body is centered and not worrying too much about her hand. So somewhere thereabouts, and you can see that that's going to put her foot kind of nicely planted on the ground here too. Next, I'm going to scale her down using the uniform scale. We'll zoom in here to see this. And I'm just going to scale her until she actually matches up with about the height of the box. Now, again, I just put in 167 for the height of the box. I'm getting it slightly over here. This is fine. As soon as you're happy with this, as long as you're not trying to achieve a centimeter or even a millimeter perfect scale, this is going to work. So now that I have her kind of placed in the inside the box here in the way that I like, I can go and delete the box so that it doesn't impede me any further. And what I would like to do now with this model is I want to confirm these settings before export. So if I go right click on my scale tool, I can see that she is 12.693% of what she should be. And that's not good. So we can't have percentages like that because they might actually get exported depending on where we bring this. Some software might read that. So I'm going to reset her transformations so that that reads as the new normal. So there's now 100%. Now we just need to permeate this through all of the other places where she exists. So I'm going to export selected, and I'm just going to go and overwrite my OBJ in here. So here's my avatar, which I exported. We'll go and export that. I want to make sure I don't get any errors or warnings here when I do this. And now inside of ZBrush, in order to rescale her in ZBrush, I'm just going to, again, I'm at my lowest subdivision level. I'm just going to go to import, and I'm going to grab that avatar, and it will scale her accordingly here. And all of my subdivisions are still there. So she's actually gone and completely scaled up the way that I want her to, taking all of that information and detail along with her. So brilliant. Now that I've got that done, I could go and save this file, and she's now to scale. The next thing that I need to do is find out whereabout I would like those patterns to exist in terms of scaling. So in ZBrush here, I'm going to go to my Move tool, and if we go in, so here's the regular 3D gizmo that has now been a part of ZBrush for a couple of versions. And if I go and turn that off and I go to the 3D gizmo, this is the Transpose Line. So this is something that has been around in ZBrush for quite some time, and it does have a lot of uses. It's actually a ruler. And so we can do things like I can click on the top of her head, hold Shift, and drag this down to the ground plane to go and see her scale. And if I get this exactly right here, I'm at 166.947. So I'm actually exactly where I was inside of 3ds Max. This ruler is now confirming that. Now, this also means that you could just scale your model in inside of ZBrush here using this ruler to do this. But I found that a lot of people, when starting out, are a little bit more familiar with something other than ZBrush in terms of scaling, and have a little bit of an easier time moving that way. She's also standing on the ground plane now, which she wasn't before, something else that you might find more difficult doing inside of ZBrush. The next thing that I want to do is I want to go and determine the height of some of these clothing pieces here now. So if I go in, drag this thing down, I'm going to go and look at that first outfit that she needs to wear, which is going to be the bodysuit here. And so I've got from the top of her shoulder to about where her groin is as the height of this panel. So inside of ZBrush, if I go and put this marker on about the top of her shoulder, and again, it kind of curves over and goes a little bit past, so this is not going to be really crazy accurate, but I just kind of want to get close enough. It looks like 64 centimeters is about the height that I want for that. So in here, I do want to mark this thing as being 64 centimeters in height. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to scale this pattern inside of Marvelous Designer pretty accurate to this. Now you can scale patterns up and down. It's not a hard thing to do, but I find if you've got a better starting point, it'll give you a much better end result. So I'm just going to go into some text here, and I'm going to put just 64 cm in here. I'm going to make this a legible font. We're going to go change that color to black. That looks way too small. So there we go. So I've got a 64 centimeters, and I'm just going to put along the waistline here for the height of this thing. If I absolutely need to, I could put arrows in here, but I think I can remember that. That also is what I'm going to do with these other two patterns here. So again, I've got the starting point of her jacket here. And if I go and put this down about where her jacket was meant to end, somewhere kind of just below the navel here, I'm at, we'll call that 45. And so I'm going to go and put a 45 in the jacket. So we'll do the front here, which is where I'm measuring this. And so we'll type 45 cm. Make sure this is on the topmost layer. I'm going to merge this layer down. So that is going to work there. And you can see why this is important, even just the scale of my lettering, right? These things are all different sizes. And then finally, we're going to go and do her pants. So I'll leave this marker here, or not. I'm going to bring this down to about where I wanted her pants to end. And you can see that I'm actually running this down her leg instead of going perfectly straight, because that's the way that the pattern is lined up. And so if I go and line this up that way, it should give me something a little bit more accurate. So it looks like about 80 centimeters here. I'm going to put 82 in for the pant leg length. And again, that is the front that I was measuring, not the back. So that means I've got to put it in here, and this is going to be 82 cm. So now I can go and merge all of this down, and I'm going to save each of these files as a PNG so that I don't have compression. That's going to be bodysuit, save, close. We're going to take the jacket, PNG, and jacket, and we'll overwrite this older one, and we'll do the same thing with our pants. And this is going to be pants.png as well. So with that, we're now completely ready to begin work inside of Marvelous Designer. In the next video, we're going to start in Marvelous Designer by importing the avatar and getting our patterns set up for reproduction. Hope to see you then.